Welcome to Bold Like a Leopard, where we confront discomfort. That's the new buzz line. And I am actually shooting this for the third time, trying to get this to be as short as possible before my live stream with Johnny Vito. Anyway, so 2 firestorms over the weekend. I'm going to try to go through them pretty quickly, but still get to the point. Jay-Z and the NFL supposedly stabbing Kaepernick in the back, according to many of Kaepernick's supporters, and the Bill Maher versus the squad controversy, both of which show, I would say, a generational difference on the left in America. So before we get too far from the point, here is part of the conference with Jay-Z. I couldn't find a whole video, but here we go.
Okay. I think we've passed kneeling. I think it's time to go into actionable items. I think everyone knows what the issue is, and we're done with that. Everyone knows what you know what the issue is? You know why we were kneeling? Okay. Do you know the issue? Yeah. Do you know the issue? Yes? We all know the issue now. Okay, next. Where are we moving on next? And I'm not, again, so to be clear for the room, I'm not minimizing that part of it because that has to happen. That's a necessary part of the process. But now we all know what's going on. What are we going to do? How are we going to stop? Because the kneeling was not about a job. It was about injustice. Let me bring attention to injustice. Everyone's saying, how are you going forward? And Cap doesn't have a job. This wasn't about him having a job.
So this was from a reaction video too, but we'll just watch some of a reaction from, I guess, a so-called Afro-American white person, Sean King.
As you may have seen or heard, yesterday the NFL announced a wide-ranging partnership with Jay-Z and his company, Roc Nation. Now, I'm just going to be completely raw and open about my feelings on this deal. I'm deeply disappointed. I'm deeply disappointed in Jay-Z. I'm deeply disappointed that he formed this partnership with the NFL. I'm deeply disappointed that we learned that he has been privately negotiating this partnership for over a year without ever mentioning a word about the deal to Colin Kaepernick, even though they spoke countless times over the past year. I'm deeply disappointed at several things that Jay-Z said in his press conference with NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell yesterday. And I'm definitely disappointed in several things that Jay-Z has said in multiple media interviews. And here's what I know. In our community, we have sacred figures who've grown so loved and so admired that you don't dare critique them publicly, even if it's warranted. In our community, we have some people who are so revered that sometimes we are blinded even to their biggest mistakes. The Obamas are on that level. Oprah is on that level. And I think Jay-Z and Beyonce are probably on that level now.
So you can hear his view on that. We'll also get from The Root, they have actually the reaction of the closest collaborator with Kaepernick, Eric Reed, who is now with the Panthers. He was a teammate on the 49ers.
Maybe while you're out on the field, I don't know if you've seen the TMZ's reporting that Jay-Z is going to be a part owner of an NFL team. It has not come out what NFL team just yet, but that he is going to invest a significant amount to become part owner of an NFL team. As it relates to everything that's gone on this week, how does that make you feel?
More of the same. Jay-Z claimed to be a supporter of Colin. Wore his jersey, told people not to perform at the Super Bowl because of the treatment that the NFL did to Colin. And now he's going to be a part owner. And it's kind of despicable.
So he said it's kind of despicable, which they actually misquoted him here. But the fact is this. This is, so The Root is editorializing it, saying with at least half of his 30 pieces of silver, Sean Jay-Z Carter will soon acquire a significant ownership interest in an NFL team, reports TMZ, making him the first black person to be an owner in the league's history. The team itself was not disclosed, but a source told the site that the deal is imminent and that Carter wants to continue to be a change agent for the NFL. The old changed the system from within, while of course profiting, which rarely works out because by the time you look up, you're Robert Johnson. So that's their viewpoint. You also have Jamel Hill, who is also really throwing the firebomb at Jay-Z, and this is to some degree understandable. But before we get back to that, I do want to go over the Bill Maher clip. I will only play the audio because of copyright issues. And then we'll have Emma Vigeland's reaction to that, and I'll try to tie those two issues together.
It's a bullshit purity test. BDS is a bullshit purity test by people who want to appear woke but actually slept through history class.
That's true. Thank you.
It's predicated on this notion. I think it's very shallow thinking that the Jews are in Israel mostly white and the Palestinians are browner, so they must be innocent and correct, and the Jews must be wrong. As if the occupation came right out of the blue, that this completely peaceful people found themselves occupied. Forget about the intifada's and the suicide bombings and the rockets and how many wars. And let me read, Omar Barghouti is one of the co-founders of the movement. His quote, "No Palestinian, rational Palestinian, not a sellout Palestinian, will ever accept a Jewish state in Palestine." So that's where that comes from. This movement, someone who doesn't even want a Jewish state at all. Somehow this side never gets presented in the American media. It's very odd.
So that was Bill Maher, and I can tell you this. So that really, really pissed off the people who were like really deep fans of his, who considered him a leftist, especially one, Emma Vigeland, who says Bill Maher says he's an atheist. But like Sam Harris, his deepest animosity for religion is reserved for brown Muslims. It's xenophobia cloaked in, quote, truth-telling. I'm ashamed to say that I used to see him as a hero. His show has become unwatchable. So I am going to tie these two issues together, and we'll see exactly what the future portends for this. The people who are being criticized now for their deviations with the new left dogma of A, supporting Colin Kaepernick to the hilt, and B, not criticizing the BDS movement, those people are relics of past generations. You have Bill Maher, who is a boomer, and I know a lot of people make fun of boomers all the time. The baby boomer generation ended, I think, in 1965. And the next generation was Generation X, which is, of course, Jay-Z's generation. I believe he was born in 1969. And those generations were products of very different environments and different sentiments. Of course, the boomers, a lot of them grew up during the Vietnam War and saw some of their older siblings or sometimes themselves drafted into the war. And that was one of the main themes of the time, the Vietnam War, Richard Nixon, and the civil rights movement. But rising out of the civil rights movement, a lot of people saw that there was some significant change in the U.S. Granted, some of them never grew out of that time. But most people who adjusted to the world after 1975 have matured to some degree. So Bill Maher, what can you say about him? Traditionally pretty anti-war, very much critical of religion, critical of the military, critical of corporations, but generally a little more tolerant in terms of personal freedom. I can tell you, for one thing, that I really am not a fan of either Bill Maher and especially not of Jay-Z. And what about Jay-Z? Not to forget him. As a Gen Xer, he grew up in an era, yes, he was in deeper poverty and probably had a lot of real issues growing up because he was a drug dealer and he was a gang member and all of that. And those are the things that traditionally the black community doesn't really hold against him, right? the activists and progressives don't really hold that against him. They seem to turn a blind eye to actual crimes that he used to commit, where technically his victims were members of his community, selling addictive drugs to people, probably including children and other vulnerable populations within the black community. So the Gen X generation was mostly materialistic. They many of them grew up in the 80s. They, if you were living during that time, there were a lot of movies like Risky Business or Weekend at Bernie's, or you could probably even make the case Wall Street. Yes, Wall Street in 1988, I believe, came out. And then once they got into adulthood, there was, of course, the grunge era and all of that. So they were probably the generation that was most disconnected from the idea of class struggle. Even the left-wingers among them, the ones that call themselves progressives, I would say, would have a very difficult time connecting to the idea of class struggle as Marxists or as far leftists, social democrats, democratic socialists. All of those different categories, I think, are very hard for Gen Xers to relate to because they grew up in the 80s, especially an era when there was just a lot of indulgence in some of the more consumer-friendly themes of American culture. So they are detached from this new trend in progressivism. So progressivism is trying to say in the 21st century that the NFL, that TV, that music, that any sort of medium that's out there has to be bending the knee and kneeling, literally kneeling in the face of social justice demands. Among those demands is Colin Kaepernick. As JC said, okay, the real goal of the Kaepernick movement was not necessarily to get a job back for Colin Kaepernick. For many people, it was much more beyond that. It was to bring awareness to police brutality. Now, am I really considering him sincere and saying, oh, we've kind of solved the issue and move on to actionable items and stuff like that? No, I think he's really being disingenuous and full of crap. What Jay-Z is really doing is behaving the way his upbringing taught him. He's using the situation to his advantage, and he's outfoxed literally the rest of the people in the movement because technically, if you want to think about it, Jay-Z is bringing true some of the best aspirations of people within the larger black community. Oh, there's going to be a black owner in the NFL now. Just a couple weeks ago, there was talk of the word owner not being suitable for the owner of a professional franchise. I think it was in the context of the NBA, but the point still stands. We are talking about someone, Jay-Z, who did an end around that has just flabbergasted the rest of the black community because they're kind of speaking a different language and he's hearing something else. Okay, he's hearing about opportunities and they're thinking about causes, and it's just something completely different. When it comes to Bill Maher, okay, it's also a different issue because he is apparently standing up for his beliefs. You don't have to agree with Bill Maher's beliefs. I'm not an atheist by any means. I have seen his movie Religulous, which was pretty good. It was kind of setting out some of his issues with religion in a very humorous and entertaining way. So I would say that people who are criticizing Bill Maher and saying, well, you suddenly flipped. It's like you're some sort of racist now because you'll only criticize the brown Muslims. It's absolutely untrue. It's absolutely untrue because Bill Maher has consistently said very, very bitter and often inflammatory things about Roman Catholics, about evangelicals, sometimes about Jews, not quite often. And yes, about Muslims, because Bill Maher is an atheist. And if you watch Bill Maher's show and you like his content, you're likely to get some atheist takes. It's just a way that you get to know that you're watching Bill Maher. And for people to come out and say, well, suddenly he's not good enough for them, he isn't the same old Bill Maher. No, this is the same old Bill Maher. What's changed is the progressive movement. What's changed is the idea of what progressivism and liberalism are in the current age for a century. So that's about it. I think I'll cut it short here. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on Minds.com and on BitChute, as well as donate on Subscribestar. All those are at Chef Leopard. And you can also find me on Gab at Starscream85. And let's confront what makes us uncomfortable.
Inside my future eye, what I see just makes me cry.